I have never separated my work as an artist from my work as a human being. I've always put it even more strongly that, to me, my art is always a weapon.
So we are here this morning, and I appreciate each of you from a community perspective coming in and sort of chatting with us. And our purpose here is to try to develop a video for the Robeson program next Wednesday evening. And so Lance, who has been a council person, Lance Liverman.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Gregory Smith, who has been a preacher's son and one of the young brothers who grew up in the town that I've known all of his life. And then probably the richest and most enriched personality that we still have with us in town, Shirley Satterfield, who is the president, CEO, head bottle washer, program director, sister cum laude of the Witherspoon-Jackson Historical and Cultural Society. Sister Satterfield, welcome.
Thank you.
And our conversation is really to take a look at Paul Robeson. You know, I'm not sure how many of you knew, but where Adam's office is in this building used to be my office when I was director of the Princeton Youth Center. And one of the things that happened one morning when Charlotte Gibson and Joan Hill were in the office and I came to work, and I heard them talking, and they said, you know, Paul died. And this was January 26, 1975, 1976, 76, January 23rd, 1976. And the interesting part about this conversation was that I didn't know who they were talking about. They were having a conversation about Paul Robeson. I did not know, and I'm the director of this center next door to the Robeson house, and didn't know anything about Paul Robeson. And so I thought it was interesting, and so I started to do my research. And then I recognized how this was unfair, this was uninformed, a lot had happened to this brother, not only in this town, but in this country and in the world. And so it was important to try to look at him and his legacy. And I thought it would be good now, because of the chaos and the confusion and contradiction that are going on right now, to be able to bring somebody like Robeson's image, his legacy forward. And so I want to use this in Princeton during this time period to sort of talk a little bit about him. But, you know, for our purposes here, who was Paul Robeson? One, he's a black man, a world citizen. Two, born April 9th, 1898, died January 23rd, 1976. Princeton preacher's son, boyhood in Princeton, high school in Somerville, college at Rutgers, law school at Columbia, athlete, four-letter man, All-American football player, actor from Emperor Jones to Othello, singer from Old Man River to the Ballad of the Americans, and a warrior for civil rights and other liberal and progressive causes. And just as important, a family man. And when you look at that, when people talk about Robeson, they say, wow, this brother had all this background and all these skills and all this expertise, and no one knew about him. Why did they keep him out of the books? And I think they kept him out of the books, one, for racial reasons. Two, they kept him out of the books because it was important for slavery and Jim Crow and the precursor to civil rights not to realize that there was a man in our midst. If people were trees, that was the tallest tree in the forest. And so, with that said, Shirley, you grew up in the town, you went to Robeson's church, you are our town historian. Talk to me a little bit about, from a Witherspoon-Jackson Historical and Cultural Society, from a sister who grew up in the town, talk to us a little bit about the Robeson that you remember and the Robeson that you think is really needed right now in the world today.
I knew Paul Robeson, first of all. I do the history of Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was born in the house across the street. His family came here because his father was commissioned to preach at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, which at one time was called the First Presbyterian Church of Color in Princeton. And when he came here, he came with 3 children. And Paul Robeson was born in that house on April 9th, 1898. Paul loved his father. He worshiped his father. But when his father was dismissed from our church by the presbytery because they felt he was fighting too much for the rights of the colored people, and there were other issues, Paul was with his father when he moved on to Green Street. And when he moved to Green Street, Paul was basically there with his father. His older siblings had left to go to college. He was there with his mother and his father. He went to the Witherspoon School for Colored Children in 1st grade. There is a register of all of the boys in Annie Van Zant's class, and one of them was Paul Robeson. Paul loved this town in this community because he had a family who came from North Carolina. And he had relatives and he had people in this community who said to him, "You will become a credit to our race." And that's what he did. The backbone of Paul Robeson was his father. When Paul Robeson was on Green Street, his mother died. His mother died because she had tended to a coal stove, and one of the embers caught onto her garment, and she suffered terribly. Paul kind of blacked it out. He was probably at school, came home, and they say that he blacked it out because it was so traumatic. When his mother passed, his father wanted her to be buried in proximity to where the house is. So if you go from the Paul Robeson house, go across the street to the cemetery, you go straight down the path at the cemetery, and you go to the tombstone of Reverend Robeson and Mrs. Robeson. The question became, why is it that she could be buried in that part of the cemetery when it is a white part of the Princeton Cemetery? The reason is because Paul Robeson's father was Presbyterian, and that cemetery is owned by the Presbyterian Church. So that's why she was buried there. But Paul was loved by the people in Princeton. The way I know Paul Robeson is because my grandmother taught Paul Robeson at the School for Colored Children, the first school. And when he came back to sing at McCarter Theater, he came to visit my grandma. And I did have a chance to see him and listen to him, but no one tells you in those days that somebody is famous.
Well, then Shirley, hold that thought as a young person, okay, when you come into your house. And Greg, respond to this. What about the millions of young people who never had a chance of hearing that voice or seeing the man in person or on TV or in the movies? A whole generation must be startled to learn now that such a person actually existed in their lifetime. A modern-day black American with a manifold of talents, a Renaissance man. I can hear those young people exclaim and wonder, out of sight. What would you say as a young person and a preacher's son, you know what I mean, to know what we now know about Paul Robeson?
Well, I do think that the value of Paul's formation in this community is really important because this is a community that embraces people and supports them and loves them. So hearing, Shirley's account of how the community rose up and supported this family when they were in need is real important. And I think it really speaks to the foundation of our Witherspoon-Jackson community. So let me just say that. But I think that having the opportunity to use your words to empower, use your voice, use your creativity, use the gifts that God has given you to bring awareness to a community, bring awareness about issues. I think that that is what made Paul so special. And I think that that's what young people today in particular can learn from his experiences, that he was a versatile man. And because of the foundation that he got and the support that he got, he was able to exercise his gifts, he was able to exercise his talents, his athletic gifts, as well as his singing voice and his speaking voice. all of those gifts can be used to edify God, to create a sense of awareness in a community, and to bring relevance through words, through creative expression, through the gift of art, to make this world a better place. And I think that that's really what young people can be inspired about as it relates to Paul today.
You know, Lance, having been a former council person, as a leader, and as another brother from down south, because most of us came here from that, some of us didn't. But using Robeson's words again, my father was a slave and my people died to build this country, and I'm going to stay here and have a part of it just like you. I've seen you do that in this town. Your thoughts on that Robeson comment?
Well, I thank you. I think that Paul Robeson, I always call him the double R person, one for Renaissance and one for Rutgers. I think that he was an example for so many folks like me coming up, to look at someone that can achieve things. You know, I think the white elephant in the room is that he spoke his mind. He was an honest person, and he didn't let anybody tell him what to do. And I think that that was like a mentorship for me in politics and in everything else I do. The influence that Paul Robeson probably had over a lot of folks that knew of him. I never knew him in person, but I knew of him. My stepfather, Clayton Rhodes, would speak about Paul Robeson, and I knew of him, of things that he would do and had done. So I think that his example in Princeton is what has continued, as Greg said, as Shirley said, continued to live within us in the Witherspoon-Jackson area.
Shirley, Robeson said, "My future depends mostly upon myself." I've seen you build the Witherspoon-Jackson Historical and Cultural Society, and you depended just on yourself until other bunches of us gravitated around you. What did Robeson mean, though, when he said that my future depends mostly upon myself?
Well, he was called the tallest tree in the forest, and that saying came from Mary McLeod Bethune, and it's a metaphor for someone who, any picture that you see of Paul Robeson, he is the tallest person in that picture. So what he's saying is, I got a lot of information from the people in my community. I got a lot of information and love from my father, and it all came to me. So when I go out and talk to the people, whether it be singing, whether it be oratorical, whether it be whatever, he is the one. He's the one who is giving the information to others. Whether he's singing Old Man River, and when he sang Old Man River, he changed some of the words, you know. So he was the tallest tree in the forest. He is our native son. And when we talk about Paul Robeson, there is no other. And that's what he means by myself. Is that how the phrase goes?
My future depends mostly upon myself.
Yes, yes. He doesn't lean on anyone else. He tells the truth. He lived the truth. So when he talks about anytime he gave a speech, and for instance, one of the speeches was when he went to the Catskills, and they actually put their fingers up. They did a lot of things to keep him from speaking. But he said, I am here, I am going to speak because this is what I do. This is the information I'm giving to others. It isn't the person next to me. It isn't the person down the street. It isn't anybody in my family. It is I who is giving this information. So I think that's what he means.
Okay. Greg, talk to me, what does this mean to you? To answer to injustice is not to silence the critic, but to end the injustice. You know, and that's really applicable today. You know what I mean? To answer to injustice is not to silence those who are complaining about the injustice, but to end injustice.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges in our community is that when we do use our voice to speak, people are often anxious to shut us down because they don't want us to make a noise and they don't want us to disrupt what has been thought of as a very complacent and quaint little town. And so I think that especially when you think about Princeton, I think that we need to use our voice. I think that we need to speak on the things that need to be addressed. We should not be afraid to make a conscious effort to bring awareness and to look at options. I think that historically, Princeton has always been a very quiet community, and I think that historically the African American community was always conditioned to be quiet and be complacent. But I think that there definitely needs to be a voice, and there needs to be the ability to articulate what's really going on and really begin to talk about change.
Okay. You know, respond to this question, this statement, Lance. Artists are the gatekeepers of truth. Artists are the gatekeepers of truth.
I like that, and I think that the expression of artists are the gatekeepers of truth is because they are creative, and being creative, they can express themselves in many ways. I think Paul Robeson, just looking at how he spoke and how he sang and how and his acting ability, and in various other ways that he would perform and show us, is that he used his creativity to put out the truth. And I think it's important because the truth can be put out in more ways than one. And I think by using all those different levels of putting out the truth went a long way when it came to Paul Robeson.
You know, I'm not sure how many of you read Harold Cruz's book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. He talks about Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, and Robeson. And the point that he made, and this is analysis of black leadership during that time, and one of the things that he talked about was that Paul in particular really believed that America had promise. And a lot of black folks were, through religion and others, had been made to think that just do the right thing and it's going to be okay, right? But Cruz said that was an error in judgment, that the racism that ran rampant in this country was so pervasive that Paul and Baldwin and Hansberry didn't realize that these folks really didn't want to change. And it's really manifested itself now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you see that they don't really want to change. But people like Paul and Paul's legacy is so important. And in this town, we're doing the Paul Robeson House of Princeton, right? And I think, and I wasn't turned on to it until I sat down with Shirley one day and she said, you know, we're doing the Witherspoon-Jackson Historical and Culture, but right next door, I'm on the group working with Ben Colbert and some others who are trying to breathe life, who's trying to rehabilitate, who's trying to bring that house back to a very important message in our community. And so we've just been joined by Ben Colbert, who is the lead organizer. You know, one of the things for Paul Robeson was don't mourn for me, organize. The lead organizer for this. So Ben, take a minute and bring us up to date on what's happening at the Robeson House and all the good work that y'all have been doing for the last 10, 15 years.
Thank you, John. It's been a task and a labor of love, really. We are fortunate to be able to memorialize or establish a lasting memorial to Paul and his work. And also his family, his community, all are behind the idea that he is someone who should be recognized. We have an opportunity to do that, and we have been working diligently toward that goal. I should also put a plug and say how grateful we are to this community for its support of the project. I just passed and they're working on the concrete, pouring the cement for the sidewalks. But we are very proud of the Robeson House. It has been a labor of love, as I mentioned, and it's also given us an opportunity to reintroduce Paul to this community. And we've done that in a number of ways, fundraising activities that have featured his music, for instance. There are generations, perhaps maybe not mine, but certainly the generations before them, who reviled and just loved his music. And we have used that opportunity to have various events over the 10 or 15 years that we've been involved. And we really have reintroduced Paul to this community. And people are excited about the process, and we're excited to be a part of doing it.
Okay, that's important. And you know, Shirley, one of the things that Paul said was the faces and the tactics of leaders may change every 4 years, or 2, or 1, but the people go on forever. You want to respond to that?
Could you read that again, please?
He said the faces and the tactics of the leaders. You know, we're in an election year. And an example, 3 weeks ago, Joe Biden was a presidential nomination of the Democrats. Today it's Kamala Harris.
Right.
So the point here is that, you know, the faces and the tactics of the leaders may change every 4 years, or 2, or 1, but the people go on forever. What does he mean by that?
Well, if you're talking about the people in this community, we do go on forever. Unfortunately, we're fading out. But I think the legacy of Paul Robeson, the legacy of the people in the Witherspoon-Jackson community will go on forever. Whether it goes on if the people are still here, or whether it goes on because we have the Paul Robeson House, or whether it goes on because we have 29 historic plaques that let people know what used to be here. So we will go on forever. We may not be seen. I can walk down the street now, and I could walk down the street and never see a person that I knew or was related to me or who lived in this community. But I still have the feeling when I came home when did I come home? 1981 is when I came back to Princeton. When I came back to Princeton, Aunt Mamie Robeson was on one side of me hanging up her clothes on her line. On the other side of me was Mary Moore, Miss Mary Moore, and she was talking about her greens. And I felt like I was coming home after all of those years.
Yeah.
And now I don't know anyone who's on either side of me. I know them, but they're not friendly. And I think they're not friendly because that's who they are. But I still feel that this is my home. And I still feel that no matter how long, how many years go by and things change, things also remain the same.
Well, let's take that. This is an intergenerational panel, okay? And me, you, and Ben represent one generation. Let me include me in that group. But Lance represents a generation, and Gregory a little younger generation. But one of the things that I notice is that every time we bury a senior in this town, we bury a library. We bury a great deal of information. And that's why I'm really proud of you and Ben, because y'all are making sure that Paul is kept before the eyes of this community, and that our history is kept before the eyes of this community, because it's a very important history. Leighton and I had a conversation one day, and he said, JB, if we don't do what Shirley and Ben are doing, 50 years from now, they may not even know we were here. They may not even know we were here. And so the work that you two are doing is admirable. And it's also part of the reasons that it was important to do this Paul Robeson Honors recognition, to recognize Witherspoon-Jackson, to recognize the Paul Robeson House and some others in our town, because you're right, Ben is right. It's important to keep Paul's image. It reminds me of a quick story. When he was at Rutgers, every day he was going to football practice. And every day the white guys were stepping on his hands and kicking him and doing all this. And I read this in Lloyd Brown's Here I Stand. And he said that on this one day, Paul was, you could see the anger starting to swell up in him. And the guy stepped on his fist and broke his hand, right? Mm-hmm. And he got so angry, he grabbed him and lifted up above his head, and the coach howled out, Robeson, you're on varsity. You know what I mean? Because Paul was getting ready to slam this boy. And so the only way this coach should do was put him on the varsity to make him realize it. But if you look at the 1916 and 1917 and 1918 Walter Camp All-American teams, right? There are only 10 players. Robeson was the 11th player, but Walter Camp didn't want to acknowledge him. And so he kept him off the All-American teams for that very reason. Similar to, if you let Shirley tell you, she'll tell you about Woodrow Wilson telling him go down to Rutgers, you know what I mean? Or it was his brother, Paul's brother. They said go down to Rutgers. The Robeson name is very, very important. And also part of the reason that it hit me to change the name of Avalon Place to Paul Robeson Place. I mentioned this to Shirley. I asked Shirley one day, did she know Ben Wright? Ben Wright used to be the head of medicine over at Princeton Hospital.
He went to our church.
And so he and I developed a relationship when I was here running the youth center. And when Paul died, he and I created this committee, Paul Robeson birthday celebration or something like that. And we changed the name of the street and did the first program that they had over at Princeton Middle School on him with a baritone from a student who was at the university, bringing the talents that were in the town at that time. And so seeing the work that Shirley and Ben are doing to bring those things back and to see the progress that has been made over at the Paul Robeson House, to see the progress that's been made with the Witherspoon-Jackson Historical and Cultural Society, you know, sort of says that our future lies in our own hands. And Greg, as a preacher's son, what does that mean, our future lies in our own hands?
I think it's a call to action, and I think that it really means that we as a community have to begin to, we have to continue to model what Shirley and Ben are doing, and people like Lance and myself, we're watching, and we are trying to do our part. But I think that there are a lot of other people that need to be connected and brought up to the table. And so I think that this is a call to action. I think this is a cry to the community out there that's listening to this to know that we need you, we need each other in order to continue to carry this legacy forward.
Okay. Lance, Paul said, as an artist I come to sing, but as a citizen I will always speak for peace, and no one can silence me in this.
I like that. You know, we are who we are, our makeup, our DNA. We are who we are. Paul, in that statement, he was basically saying that I'm going to be Paul Robeson no matter where you put me, no matter what you do to me. You can step on my hand, you can kick me, you can pull me down, you can call me names, you can isolate me from your country, you can do everything you want, but I'm still going to be Paul Robeson. And I think that's so important. And I think that many of us need to have that kind of respect for ourselves and the self-esteem to stand up and say, I'm Lance Liverman, no matter what you do to me.
Okay. Go, Ben, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm just listening to both of them, and Shirley and I talk about this all the time, but we are from an era, a very important era. I'm not a Princeton native. I get reminded of that from time to time. But I was very involved in the civil rights movement, an activist in my hometown of Savannah, Georgia. So I came to this community with a mindset that we can do it. I got a job at Educational Testing Service. That's impossible, at least in those days. The point I'd like to make, though, is that we have come through an era where we're going to be taking initiatives. If we've learned anything for the last 50 or 60 years, we have to be active, we have to be assertive, and we cannot be turned away from the important milestones, neighborhoods, and people that made us who we are. And I think Robeson House will mean a lot. It already does, but it means a lot to be able to say, that is where he was born, that is where his father ministered to this community. That's why they fought for access to the university and access to what was rightfully theirs. And so part of my commitment is to do just that. We had no idea what purchasing this house would mean. We certainly didn't anticipate having to rebuild it from the ground up. We thought we could spend a couple of $1,000s and upgrade the electric work. Right now, we have to stop doing the work on the inside to repair a very important wall. At the bottom, the foundation was shifting, and it had to be rebuilt after we thought we were finished with that part of the house, and they're doing that now. It is a much larger project than we had imagined. And our imagination and creativity is almost to its apex in terms of the work that's necessary to make this a lasting tribute to him. And I also point out to this community, there have been some very good things that have come out of the repression and the ill treatment and the discounting that occurred for people who were very, very important for this community.
Save that, because that's a good segue for Shirley. Robeson says, Shirley, through my singing, acting, and speaking, I want to make freedom with the common struggle of the common man.
Common man, yes. He thought of himself as a common man. A lot of people in this community are common. We don't have any, we're not celebrities, we're not actresses, we are common. We grew up in this community, and I didn't even know what segregation was. And the reason was because I was sheltered by the people in my community. So when they tell me I can't go up Nassau Street, I didn't need to go up Nassau Street because I had everything in this community, and they were all common people. So we survived because of that. And I often say, when I see the young people who are now protesting, who are now want to be engaged, I said, we didn't do that when I was young. You know, I went uptown with my mother, I walked uptown, I walked around the university, I came back home. But we knew that we were oppressed, but we didn't react that way. And I didn't react until I went to the South. And when I went to the South to go to school, that's when, sitting at the counter with the Greensboro 4 to open up the 5 and 10, I said, there's really action that we have to do. So when I came back to Princeton, and I was a part, and they asked me to join the Historical Society, I said, this is fine, but you're talking about white people. What about all the people who sustained Princeton? What about the people who worked at the eating clubs? You know, so that's when it started, and I said, people need to know about us. You know, we're common people, but we've done an awful lot in this community, and that's how we survived.
You know, it's interesting, this common man thing, you know, common woman and common man, excuse me. But, you know, one of the things that Robeson said is that we ask for nothing that is not ours by right. Herein lies the great moral power of our demand. Herein lies the great moral power of our demand, because we're not asking for anything other than what's right. As a preacher, and as a preacher's son, we spend a lot of times on Sunday mornings talking about what's right and God's word. But why is that such a moral demand for us, coming up out of slavery, coming up out of Jim Crow, coming up out of the civil rights movement, being able to get the pushback on diversity, equity, and inclusion? What is your take on what's right and why we are? Shirley's talking about how she goes down south and sees how sheltered we are in Princeton, but if we get out into the world, we begin to see that people are standing up and fighting for their rights, and common people, you know, doing this. What is your take on the moral demand of what's right?
What's interesting, what comes to my mind is about the children of Israel from the beginning, when Moses, spoke to them about leaving, and the kind of challenge that they had, continuing to look back at what they had in Egypt. And there was always, as during that journey, they would often get afraid and intimidated because they thought about things were a little bit better back in Egypt. I think that there's a cost that has to take place when you are moving towards freedom, and it means that you have to move out of your comfort zone, and sometimes you have to walk into the unknown, and that can be intimidating for people. But it's definitely necessary, and like the children of Israel ultimately arrived to their place of freedom, it took them 40 years to really take that journey, and if had they trusted God, I think that they would have gotten there a lot sooner. And so I think that we as a people really have to take the risks, and I think that we have to move forward, and I think that we have to trust God, and I think that if we do that, God is going to bring us to that place of freedom.
Okay. You know, Lance, we're doing this interview here this morning in the Arts Council, in the Paul Robeson Center, next to the Paul Robeson House, with someone who knew Paul Robeson, with someone who is running and leading an organization. And Robeson says art is not just to show life as it is, but to show life as it should be. What do you think he means by not as it is, but what it should be, and in a town like Princeton?
Well, I think that we're back to the imagination. Ben mentioned the imagination part of the Paul Robeson House. Shirley has mentioned things of that sort, and also Greg, in regard to creativity and imagination. It's that there's nothing binding or holding you back. I think that the imagination to move forward with positive things goes further than we can imagine, and I think that is the realm that he was getting on when he made that statement.
Okay. Picking up on the artist again, Ben, Robeson said the artist must elect to fight for freedom or for slavery.
I don't know. I would be a little concerned about choosing between the two. It seems like they both go hand in hand, and that little that's known, I am also an artist. And
everybody in your family is an artist, Ben.
Well, no, actually, unfortunately, we're here in the Arts Council, and I've had the honor of showing my work here. And but this idea of choosing between the two choices you mentioned seems to me never occurs in my own personal experience.
Well, then let me rephrase it. We're at a time period now, right, in this country.
Yes.
And so let me phrase it differently. A seat at the table or return to the back of the bus, because that's what he's saying.
Oh, yeah.
A seat at the table or return to the back of the bus.
I've had both experiences.
Yes.
I enjoy very much the seat at the table. I think it's very important to be there and to be involved in the dialogue. I'm not a person or encourage people to sit and not respond. This is important work. We should all have as a priority doing as Robeson did. Use your time and talents for yourself, your family, and your community.
Okay. Shirley, again, echoing Robeson's word, every artist, every scientist must decide now where he stands. He has no alternative. There is no standing above the conflict on Olympian heights. There are no impartial observers, though the heritage through the propagation of false ideas and of racial and national superiority, the artist, the scientist, the writer is challenged. The struggle invades the formerly cloistered halls of our universities and other seats of learning. The battlefront is everywhere. There is no sheltered rear. There's nowhere to hide. We must confront what is going on in the world. Your thoughts on confronting what is going on in the world?
Okay. Whether you're an artist, a scientist, it doesn't matter. Whatever your profession is, whatever your ideas are, the world goes on, and you have to confront what's going on in the world. If you're an artist, you use that to draw or to paint or whatever, how you feel about what's going on. If you're a scientist, you do experiments or you find out a way to cure cancer or whatever. If you're a teacher, you teach those to do better, to grow up to be a credit to your race, as they said to Paul Robeson. So no matter what your field, no matter what your ideas, the world goes on. And you take care of it by whatever your profession is or whatever your ideas are. I think that kind of answers the question.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Greg, I've learned that my people are not the only ones oppressed. I've sung my songs all over the world and everywhere found that some common bond makes the people of all lands take to Negro songs as their own.
Well, I think that that's a very powerful statement, and I think the reality of life is that we all have experienced some level of oppression. There's all kinds of oppression that impacts all of humanity, and I think that we need to hone in supporting one another in our struggles, in our difficulties, in our challenges, and appreciate the experiences that other cultures have had and the challenges that they've experienced and faced. And I think if we all kind of look in that humanistic lens, I think that we would be better off as a people, as the human race, by recognizing that we all have some of those struggles and we all have those journeys that we have to carry through.
Okay. Lance, the talents of an artist, small or great, are God-given. They have nothing to do with the private person. They have nothing to be proud of. They're not just a sacred trust. Having been given, I must give. Man shall not live by bread alone, and what the farmer does, I must do. I must feed the people with my songs.
But that's deep. Yeah. That's deep. Well, I think that for me, that the artists and the sowing, I think about what Greg was mentioning about Israel, and I'm thinking about the sowing of the seeds and how the sowing of the seeds is so important. I think that artistry and being an artist means that. It means that we're sowing seeds to people. And sowing the seeds is different than the seeds we find out in the field. These seeds are seeds of accomplishment, seeds of we can do it, seeds of our forefathers and mothers have been here before, and they were able to accomplish things. So I think that the whole idea behind the statement, in my mind, it takes me back to the sowing of the seeds, which has brought all of us a mighty long way.
You know, we're talking about the elections and just the change of the personalities just a minute ago. And Robeson said the intolerance of a few, or the risk of it, carries the day against the wider humanity of the many. Meaning that we're in a world where we're listening, the few crazy folks are getting a big voice, but the wider humanity is almost silent. And we need to change the dynamic and push the humanity, the much more human beings in us to come forward. And I see, Ben, what you're doing over at the Robeson House is trying to bring that Robeson humanity a little bit at a time into the community, into the town, into the state, into the nation, you know, with Shirley's back. Talk to us about, what do you think about the time period that we're in right now and the intolerance of the few?
I grew up in an era when we thought being able to have lunch at the Woolworths was a great deal, a big deal. Can you imagine? I don't even think they have them anymore. But people fought for that privilege. And I think very much that times change, people grow and not. There are things that are happening in the 50s and the 60s that are being replicated today. I hear Donald Trump, he sounds just like George Wallace as far as I'm concerned. Those are the kinds of reminders that life goes on. We have learned, and we have made significant progress. But we have to understand the people of Israel, the people of Afghanistan, those are the same struggles in a different environment, but the idea and the oppression is the same, to put people down, to not allow for equal opportunities for everyone. And so I think that we have learned from our past. We should take the example of the Robeson House. It's going to be here long after I'm gone, and someone will remember that what Paul is, who he is, what he has done, and how he or they might replicate it. I have to mention, we just named several students Robeson Scholars. We have already reached back to begin to orient and encourage young people to know their history and to actively participate in it. We're very proud of that project. We're going to be hearing more about the scholars over the years.
Well, listen, this has been one of the most interesting conversations that I've had in a long time. Because one, it's intergenerational. Two, I'm talking to folks who are knowledgeable. I'm looking forward to the conversation on Wednesday with representatives of the Robeson House in Philly and folks down at Raritan and some other places. But this has been great. Shirley, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your insight. Ben, appreciate the work. Continue doing God's will. Lance, what do I say, man, to a brother who every day makes it his point to get up and see how he can help make this community a better place, whether he's an elected official or not. And to you, young brother, I have a picture of when my wife and I were married, and off to the side of the picture is a little brother on a bike, and that little brother is you. And so I've known you for so long, and I've appreciated watching you grow and become. And just as important, thank all of you for doing what you do. I used to say, in the words of the old Negro spiritual, be good now, but I've changed it. And so now it's in the words of the old Negro spiritual, we are here, we are now, we are beautiful. And thank you all for beautifying this situation this morning very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you, John, for doing such a great job. We appreciate you.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long ways from home. 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 Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. A long ways from home. A long ways from home. A long ways from home. because my mouth is wide with laughter, and my throat is deep with song, you do not think I suffer after I have held my pain so long? Because my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry? Because my feet are gay with dancing, you do not know I die?